Hello, I'm Bret, and this is my live show. So we're going to get into it today. I've got a lot of stuff to talk about. Maybe you do too. So this is Q&A time. We're talking about courses, learning Docker, learning Kubernetes, learning containers. So let's get into it. Get your questions in early because as these Q&As have gone lately, even after multiple hours, I don't get to get through all the chat and all the questions. So if you came here about the courses, things you got to know, things that aren't working, whatever, get that stuff in now, and hopefully I can get to it early. I'm going to go through a few announcements and just reminders on all the stuff happening, and then we'll get into the dirt, the nitty gritty. How is everyone doing today? We got Docker captains in the chat. All right. Developer guy is here. What's up, man? people from all over the world as usual. Ali, Aram, Martin's here, giving the heart Foxy. I wish it would show in my little screen thing, it would show the actual custom emojis, but it doesn't. Hello, Gulam. Vijay Hanson's here. All right. So just a couple of announcements, a little bit of marketing, a little bit of what's going on in my world. So if you didn't hear, a couple weeks ago, we launched the next course. This one's going to totally be different, something I've never done before, outside of custom workshops that are for large companies that take months to create and are quite expensive. This is a live-only course. It's going to be done over Zoom, and you're going to be with me in a Zoom every other day for 2 weeks for just 90 minutes a day. So we're going to do around 90 minutes, and it's going to be a mixture of me teaching you some stuff, me doing this, talking, sharing information about automation and GitHub Actions, and then GitOps with Argo. And then you're going to do stuff. We're going to have sample clusters. You're going to actually do things in GitHub. You're going to do things in Argo. And then we're going to dedicate time each week on Fridays for you. I'm going to block out your calendar for an hour and a half for you to implement this stuff on your real projects. So this is not a theoretical course. This is not something generic that you take in hopes of someday using the knowledge. This is actually applying the knowledge in the course with all the other people, and we're going to do it together. And you're going to be learning and meeting other people that are doing the exact same thing you're doing. So other DevOps pros doing stuff on Kubernetes with automation and GitOps. And we're going to be breaking out into small groups. We're going to be doing a bunch of different things that I've never done before, and I'm very excited about it. So that starts next month. We're only letting in for this first cohort, the first 10 or 15 people. We've already had multiple signups, so I expect this to fill up before the deadline. And if you're interested at all, jump over here. This is a link. You can sign up now. If you have questions, if you want to know about, if you need help getting it reimbursed by your employer, if you have questions about the content or the syllabus or what's going to happen in the course, send me an email, put it in chat below, reach out to me on Twitter, jump in my Discord server, which is right here. We've got a huge Discord server. We're going to talk about that in a minute. If you have any of those questions, find me elsewhere. Bret@bretfisher.com is my email address. So just find me, ask me. I'll even get on a Zoom call with you to talk about it, to essentially help see if this is what you want, if this is the right fit for you. This expects you to already know Docker and some Kubernetes. This is not something where we're learning Docker and Kubernetes. This is something where you're applying your knowledge for more automation. That's DevOps, right? DevOps primarily, a lot of what we do in DevOps, besides measuring and metrics, is simply figuring out workflows that we're all doing day to day and then automating that. And that's what this course is doing. And then we're going to do GitOps, which I believe GitOps is going to become, it kind of already is in some circles, but it's going to become the standard way to deploy Kubernetes workflows. Workloads, any of your apps on Kubernetes. Even now we have some of this stuff on Swarm. We have some concepts, some repos out there on doing this for Docker and Swarm. So GitOps, I feel like, is the future. Basically, it's different than a push. It's more like a pull, and it's, I think, a little bit more reliable. And the whole industry is circling around this. We now have GitOpsCon. We now have all these conferences around GitOps that are days at conferences around GitOps. I have been a huge fan since the beginning. 2019, 2020 was when I first heard about it. I think, created it, the idea, maybe a little bit before that, maybe 2017. But anyway, if you're interested, find me, sign up, do whatever you need to do to find out if this is going to help your team. I'm hoping to get multiple teams with multiple people in them coming at the same time, because that's going to be the most useful thing. That's going to allow you to basically leapfrog a project that could take you months. My goal is to have you doing it in weeks for a fraction of the price of consulting, right? A lot of times over the last few years, I've been hired to help companies big and small do this same thing. So I've created this recipe after learning from large enterprises that now one of them was even bought by Google and other financial companies, governments, you name it. I've actually worked with a lot of these different size companies, even small startups. And generally, they have the same requirements at the beginning, right? When they're starting this automation journey, when they're starting this GitOps journey, there's a lot of learning. There's a lot of learning how to do it the right way by doing it the wrong way first. And I'm going to get you out of that mode. I'm going to help you avoid the pitfalls. So anyway, enough about that. Very excited about that. That is my focus this quarter. If you didn't know, we relaunched the newsletter this year. It is now on my website, controlled by me. So no company, no giant tech company can tear down my newsletter service review. And so we're jumping back into the newsletter business. And we just released one this morning that talked a little bit about some stuff I released, some new stuff we're going to talk about in a minute. Awesome Swarm. So jump on that newsletter. If you're not already on it, it's completely free. If you're interested in buying me a coffee and thanking me for all this stuff, this show, the podcast that comes from it, the newsletter, the Discord server, the open source, if you're interested in any of that and you would like to buy me a coffee, at the very top, you can click on memberships. It's basically when you sign up for the newsletter, you have an option to thank me once a month, buying me a coffee, or you can buy a whole year up front. And I really appreciate that. That's what keeps me going. I'm in this to help you. I'm in this to help individuals. And I want to keep doing it. So I have to figure out ways to make this financially viable because no company is paying me to do all this stuff. All right. There's a sale going on our merch server. Did you know I have merch? I'm not wearing it today, but I have a bunch of shirts. And sometimes we give them away with coupons. We did that a couple of weeks ago. And I thought, oh, no, the sale was just over. We just had another sale end a couple of weeks ago. So there will be another sale coming soon. I'll let you know if you would like to get discounts. Otherwise, you can just pay the retail prices for things. And you can probably see some of those pieces of swag below. All right, one of the last big things, and we're probably going to get into it. Two things. One, I was recently at Civo Navigate, a conference run by Civo, the cloud hoster, and I spoke twice there. I did a Docker workshop. One of the interesting things that's happening is Docker. People are actually learning Kubernetes before Docker now, which is wild. And you might ask yourself, if you learned Docker first, like most of us, you think, how in the world can you do that? How can you learn Kubernetes without knowing Docker? And I think the answer to that is that if you're not primarily learning as a software developer, maybe you're primarily learning it to deploy other people's workloads, or maybe you're in a company that runs Kubernetes and maybe you're tech support, or maybe you're operations, or maybe you're someone who needs to understand it for creating documentation or internal tooling or something like that, but you're not primarily focused on building containers and then deploying them, and you're just really doing the deploy or the operations, you can technically get pretty far without knowing how images work, how they're built, how Docker files are made, all the things that you can do with Compose. You can get away with that. And I had a workshop in Tampa, Florida last week, and it was a full room. We had standing room only essentially in the back because there were people there. Multiple people told me they had learned Kubernetes, but realized they didn't know enough about Docker, or maybe even skipped Docker, and they needed to come back to basics. They needed to go back to the Docker command line. So that's an interesting industry thing that's happening, and we talked about it years ago at DockerCon. Somewhere around 2019, I actually was talking to some of the people that make DockerCon, and we were talking about how we're going to always need to do Docker 101s. It's never going to stop because people are always coming out of university. People are coming from different parts of the industry and learning containers. But we didn't really predict that the hype cycle of Kubernetes is so large that people might actually learn an orchestrator before they learn how to build a container. But that's what's happening. So it's a really interesting scenario. It might cause me to change some of my workshops in the future or start doing more Docker 101 workshops again. If you're someone who goes to conferences, somewhere around 2019, essentially all conferences stopped wanting to do Docker 101s. They were like, we just want to do Kubernetes. We want service mesh. We want all the fancy stuff. We want GitOps. We don't want Docker. No one wants to go to a Docker 101 anymore. Well, I think that the trend is going to be that those conferences, like some of them don't even exist anymore, but the conferences that do exist are going to start needing to do Docker 101s again, because we're getting a new generation of developers, a new generation of DevOps engineers, and they maybe don't know containers yet. Or maybe if they do, they just know Kubernetes. All right. So that conference led to a talk that I did that is a set of slides that is not quite finished. I actually presented it without it being fully finished, and I filled 45 minutes full of talking. But what's going to happen is that this repo is going to become a basic list of the security features or practices or workflows that you can implement. I'm going to put this in chat. You can implement this step by step, essentially. So it's going to give you sort of an a la carte view of all of the things that I can think of that make a real difference in security. So that's going to be something that's practical. It's not theoretical. It's more, what do we know works? For example, not running as root in your container, or changing your base image to a slimmer image to reduce your vulnerability count. These are all very practical things, but there's a lot of these steps. And sometimes you learn Docker and Kubernetes, and then you start implementing it, and you learn the hard way, maybe because the security team comes to you and says, hey, we don't like your image. It's got too many vulnerabilities. Or we don't like your production servers because you're running containers without seccomp enabled. What is seccomp, right? So there's like a lot of things that need to happen end to end, everything from building your image all the way through the pipeline to running your image in production, and then even monitoring production for new vulnerabilities, right? So that these are a lot of the supply chain parts that we now call supply chain security. And I think that's a big theme for this year. My prediction on Twitter yesterday, was two main things are happening in 2022. AI, what's going to be the topic of the day, topic du jour. Every tool is going to try to figure out how to implement a large language model generative AI like OpenGPT or ChatGPT, OpenAI's tool, right? That we're all probably playing with. Everyone's going to try to figure out a way to implement that tool. And so far, like, all the tools on my tool list are either have already added it or are experimenting with it right now. My search engine, my note-taking tool in Notion, my terminal, my iTerm now has it. You name it, all these tools, my email tool has it. Like, there's just, everywhere I look, there's now a little bit of AI generating text when I'm writing. And I'm expecting it to be soon in my blog engine. Like, it's going to take over a lot of things. And so it's also happening in DevOps. That's going to be a big theme. The other one is supply chain security. And so finally, after years of the security people complaining about containers, which the funny thing is the reason they're complaining is we can know these things. We couldn't know them before. We can now know before you deploy an image. We can know that that image has a certain number of vulnerabilities or CVEs in it. We didn't used to know that before. It was very hard to determine before you deployed a server or installed stuff on a server what you were installing. There was not a lot of great tools in the industry. They were either very proprietary or expensive. And now what's happening in just a very short amount of time, in just a few years, the pipeline of tools that we need and the workflows we need are starting to come together. Registries are starting to support some of these artifacts and allowing us to store them, like SBOMs and provenance and all these things that are maybe new terms to you. So that's what this topic is about. This is going to mention some of that. And so if you want to check that repo out, it's empty right now. I have to convert the slides into Markdown, essentially, because not everybody has Keynote, and that's what I did the slides in. So I'm going to have a lot of links in there. That is coming soon. That is related, ironically, to my new course. So this course isn't specifically security related, but we are going to be implementing some of those things, like vulnerability scanning, like smoke testing, some of the best practices around Kubernetes pod spec, all the things that you would see in security. Those are a part of the automation in GitOps pipelines. So as a part of this course, you're going to be getting some of that experience. You're going to be doing some of those things, and it's all coming together, right? The last thing, before I jump in the chat, the last thing I wanted to talk about was Awesome Swarm. I'm excited about Awesome Swarm. So Awesome Swarm is something I just launched today. We've been talking about it in the Discord server. This Discord server right here has a Swarm chat room now. Weirdly, we haven't had it for years because my argument has always been, hey, let's just do it in the Docker channel because it's Docker Swarm. It's just part of Docker. But Mirantis has picked up the baton over the last few years, and they are the ones putting more effort into Swarm. Of course, it's still shipped with Docker in the latest release, and Maven also ships their own container runtime that has Swarm in it. So the future of Swarm is looking good again, and so I thought it would be great as a community, those of you that are Swarm fans, you know who you are, to come together and start collecting what we consider to be the current good state of Swarm tooling, blog entries, workflows, all those things. So this is just the beginning. I finished it this morning, and we've already got some PRs. Thank you, Martin and community, for doing that. And you can get involved too. So over here, I think, I haven't put this up yet, but if you jump over to this Awesome Swarm repo, my hope is that we'll get this listed in the awesome lists. If you're not aware of the awesome list, it's the list of lists. And hopefully next month we'll get this listed in there, get some more attention on it. I'm going to hopefully get Docker involved, and even some of the other communities that have been sort of hovering around the Swarm ecosystem, including the Portainer community, which is now in this list because they launched swarmkit.org as a forum, as a discourse forum. So they're also getting back into Swarm and getting excited about it because Portainer is probably the most popular GUI for Swarm and now Kubernetes. Portainer.io, if you didn't know about it, it lets you in a single GUI manage Docker engines, Swarm engines, Kubernetes. I don't think it does Nomad yet, but I'm not even sure about that. They're just trying to be the universal tool. They include things like the ability for you to install apps, sort of an app dashboard or a catalog of apps, especially a lot of the infrastructure stuff. And they're just killing it. I saw their CEO and co-founder, Neil, a couple weeks ago. He was down in Tampa with us. I got a free backpack. Thanks, Neil. And we talked about sort of the state of Portainer, the state of Swarm, really, SwarmKit, and the new version of Docker, which I see in chat. I see you people talking about V23 that just came out, so we're going to talk about that today too. If you have questions, I am not well-versed in every PR, but I'm currently going through all the PRs and feature lists in V23 so I can really start to understand what's going on there. We do have new features in Swarm, most notably the CSI support, which is something that we're going to see evolve over the next year, I'd say. There's not a lot to do there yet in terms of being able to use the functionality, but we all need to go to our favorite storage providers and basically put in a GitHub issue and convince them to include now Swarm support, because we basically have some new tooling allowing us to use Kubernetes CSI providers in Swarm as well, using a similar standard. There still needs to be some work done, but I'm excited because it's basically been coming for years, and we finally have a new Docker version to include it. So yes, that's the news of the day. That was a lot of stuff. Thanks for sticking with me. All right. Hello, everyone. Dan, I have on my Linux servers, I am on 23.00. I don't think I've updated anything to .1 yet. Let me know your experiences. If you have experiences with 23, the new version of Docker Engine that basically is the first major release of Docker Engine in 3 years. Docker Desktop, I do not believe, has been updated to V23 yet, weirdly, but it is in the server apt packages. So that seems to be in the opposite order to me. Like I'd think that they'd want to update our desktops before they update servers, but this is funny because some of us have been talking that we haven't been pinning our Docker engine versions on servers for a while now because it's always been just patches, Docker patches, and now we have this major new version, which just doing an apt upgrade caused a major version upgrade. And there are, of course, like any major new version, there are some hiccups. I actually discovered one accidentally a couple weeks ago. It was a very minor issue, but it due to some deprecation of config files, there was a certain directory in Etsy on Linux that didn't get created like you'd expect for Docker, and it caused scripts and automation to fail sometimes. So little things like that just need to be worked out. I know some people have reported issues, and that's why we've seen these point releases like 2301 happen really quickly. Yeah, it's good to hear some of the news. Hello, Greece. What's up? Brendan's here. So B, yes, this course is absolutely for beginners. I'm not sure if you asked that in the course, but I just recently, like in the last day or so, answered that same question for someone else. Yes, the Docker course is meant for someone who's new to Docker. You need to know Linux, at least basics of Linux, a shell, how to do shell commands. You need to know something about the cloud and how to create servers in the cloud, stuff like that. You need to know some basic ideas around distributed computing and networking, just how do things talk over a network? How does a web server talk to a database server? You need to know all those things, right? So this isn't an introduction to development or to DevOps or anything like that. This expects you to have some of those fundamentals, but I try to give you as many tips along the way. And of course, the whole course is show and tell. So you can watch me and type along, and then you'll get assignments and quizzes and stuff like that. So good luck. Martin, sorry, the EU shop is not up. So chat with me later. I think I have basically another coupon I can give you so that we can get you those shirts. I know that it'll cost you stuff. I don't know if an extra coupon will help actually, but we're not able to spend the time in the next couple of weeks setting up the EU shop. It's going to just require a complete recreation of the site. We have to add all the merchandise again, and that's not something we can get to soon. If you want to wait, that's fine. The coupon does not expire. But if you want your swag now, you're unfortunately going to have to pay for the import stuff from the U.S. All the way from Mexico and Brazil. Nice. Central America, what's up? South America, yeah. All the Americas are here today. Yeah, I need to figure out the Nomad. I couldn't remember or not if they helped with Nomad. Free backpacks. Yeah, this was like a portable backpack. You could fit it in your pocket. It's really thin and it just kind of puts in its own pocket, stuffs in itself. So I like taking something like that on trips in case I come back with too much swag. I have an extra bag to fit it all in. So that'll probably be a conference regular for me. Dano Data is asking, can Automount service account token be set to false on the command line after a service account is created? I don't know. That's a very specific question. I don't know. When you say the command line, I'm assuming you're meaning editing. You would probably have to do a kube control edit of that. Essentially, that's going to represent itself as YAML, but of that object, of the service account object. I don't know. That's a good question. I would just say edit it, edit the resource, try to save it. If it doesn't work, if it's read only, it will tell you. It will immediately tell you cannot change this key value after creation. Like there are certain values like that you can't. They're read only essentially once they're created, and it will just tell you right away. So if it was me and I needed to know that, I would simply go try to edit it. I'd do a kube control edit that resource name. Hello. What's up, Turkey? Lee's asking, is Docker Engine out for production release? As far as I know, I mean, they released it on apt. It is a major release. I probably wouldn't run it immediately on production servers without at least testing it on test servers, like any major new version of critical software like Docker, right? So I don't have myself production Docker servers. So I am not the one to do that testing. I'm going to wait on you, the community, to tell me, hey, we upgraded, it was fine, which I've heard some people say. They upgraded, it's fine. I know in our Discord server, right there, in our Discord server, people are talking about it, and someone upgraded on CentOS, CentOS being sort of CentOS 7 specifically, and dealing with device mapper and sort of legacy storage drivers. If you're someone who's deep into the Docker camp, you understand storage drivers, and that we're all shifting to Overlay 2. That's been going on for years now. And there used to be lots of storage drivers, but the one that Docker is really preferring is Overlay 2. That's not related to network overlay. That is about storage of your images and containers on disk. And that there are now legacy or deprecated storage drivers that you need to account for. And so someone was describing an issue they were having on CentOS 7, and that they basically needed to hard code the old storage driver, device mapper, or whatever they were using, because Docker requires that now. It doesn't. It basically makes you specify if you're using a deprecated driver, you have to specify it. So that's very custom on older kernels, older distributions of Linux that are updating to the latest version of Docker. I don't recommend CentOS 7 to anyone, and I haven't for a very long time. So if you're using CentOS 7, please use something else, something newer, something with a fresher kernel and not so many problems with Docker. I think over the course of the last 10 years, a majority of production Docker issues have been from Red Hat and specifically from CentOS, like 75%, way more than Ubuntu. I don't know so much about Fedora. Most people I know in production are either using the cloud Linux that comes with their cloud or Ubuntu or Debian. That's what I see in production mostly. So, and those people, especially on Ubuntu, usually have happy days. Usually the edge cases don't show up, but with CentOS, they kind of do. Ajay, we'll cover it from scratch. I'm not sure what you're asking. Can you ask that question more detailed? What are you talking about when I cover it from scratch? So, hello, sir. Is there a Docker option for IoT devices? So, kind of. So Docker can run on ARM. You can, I mean, if your IoT device is 386 ARM, ARM v7, ARM v8, even ARM v6, you can run Docker on it. There's a build for it. If you're talking more specific devices like Arduino or something that's not running an ARM-based variant, there might be custom builds for you. You're really going to have to Google around. And that might be specific to, that community of that IoT architecture, that platform. They're going to have a special build possibly of Docker. I don't know of places where they're building non-Docker tooling for custom IoT devices with very small chips. I know of Arduino, so I'm just picking on that one specifically. Obviously, there are others. But I don't know of other ones, like, for example, Podman or other container runtimes. I don't really hear anything about them. So definitely try to look up Docker for that IoT device architecture specifically, the platform that you want to do. So that's a good question. I have heard, like, especially NASA, right? NASA has built custom Docker versions on very small chips. So, but they're very skilled, right? They know how to build custom. They know how to break it apart and build it in a special way for their chipsets. But that's an exception, I think. Santosh, are there hands-on labs during this course? If I'm a beginner, will this be too difficult to follow? Automate your... Okay, so for my GitOps course, you need to know Docker and Kubernetes. This course expects that. So I already have below coupons and courses for learning Docker, learning Compose, learning Swarm, and learning Kubernetes. This GitOps course, if you scroll to the bottom, there's an FAQ at the very bottom, and one of the questions in that FAQ is, what do I need to know for this course? And so I kind of list that out, right? If I go all the way down, I know it's a little bit at the bottom there. So FAQ, must I use Kubernetes and GitHub for this course? Yes. This is specifically about deploying to Kubernetes from GitHub. What experience level? And I break it down. Docker, you need to know how to build and run containers. If you don't have GitHub Actions experience, that's fine. But you do need to have basic GitHub experience. You need to know what pull requests are. You need to understand the basic software lifecycle and workflows for GitHub, because we're only together for 9 hours, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Like 9 to 12 hours is how long this course will be. And you'll have homework sometimes, but it's not going to be 25 hours of content. So I can't teach you all these things. But Argo, you will be learning Argo, and you will be learning some GitHub Actions. So those are the two things we're going to focus on, and we're going to implement them on GitHub and on Kubernetes. So you need to know a little bit of GitHub and a little bit of Kubernetes to get started. I don't have a GitHub course, but I do have a Kubernetes course below that you can get and take before this live course starts in a month. So you can do that. That's a great question. Ajay, if that's the question you're answering, I'm going to keep scrolling and see if I can find your better question. Dan saying, I think there's some confusion around Docker and Kubernetes. Docker shim was removed in 124, not Docker engine. We are using containerd, but there is cry dockerd adapter for Docker engine, correct? Yeah, yes, absolutely. You can still use Docker or the Mirantis container runtime, which is basically Mirantis' version of Docker. It's Docker compatible. You can use those in Kubernetes still. Underneath, they're still using containerd, or you can just use containerd directly with Kubernetes. Kubernetes itself does not ship with a runtime, so it needs a runtime. And the only thing that was changed is that the project known as Docker shim, which was maintained by the Kubernetes community to ensure that Kubernetes could use Docker as its runtime, because Docker came out before Kubernetes. So when Kubernetes standardized its runtime, Docker had already set itself up. Like its API was there, so we needed a shim to translate from Kubernetes to Docker. Then Docker released containerd as a more lightweight runtime to use in Kubernetes. So most of us have been shifting to containerd for a while now. If you still need to use Docker, for example, if you need to build images on Jenkins in a Kubernetes cluster, you might still want to use Docker as your runtime, because you can still use a Docker build command, because Kubernetes by default doesn't build images. So that might be one example. But if you need to do that, absolutely. You can pick up that new shim maintained by Mirantis. It's the same as the old shim. It's just a fork. It's just maintained by different people. So what the Kubernetes community was really saying a few years ago was, we're going to stop supporting ourselves this shim in the middle, because it's really no longer necessary now that we have containerd. We don't really need Docker in most cases. But then Mirantis said, hey, we love Docker. We use Docker ourselves. We build our own custom Docker. So let's just keep supporting that shim. And they include that, I believe, in their enterprise application. They have their own Mirantis Kubernetes engine, and that comes out of the box, I believe, with the Mirantis runtime, which is Docker, and it needs its own shim. So they're kind of solving and scratching their own itch, right? But that means the rest of us can still keep using Docker and Kubernetes if we want. We just need to swap out that shim, okay? Hopefully, Dan, that answers the question. Keep them coming. Ajay, so the Docker course, Docker Mastery below, that's the course that is Docker and Kubernetes from scratch, yes. Hello, Nuno. So I should mention now, this gentleman right here, the Captain Corsair, is coming on the show next week, it looks like. Hopefully you know that too. So Nuno's going to be on the show. I'm excited about that. And we're going to talk more Windows stuff. If you haven't noticed, Nuno comes on, I don't know, about once a year or so, and once every 2 years maybe, and talks about the latest in Windows 11, WSL2, Last time we talked about GUI apps in containers through WSL2. That was pretty cool stuff. And he's going to give us an update. So come back next week if you're interested in learning more about the latest in Windows and WSL2. That's pretty exciting. What is up? I'm here late and questions. Jordan's here. Thank you so much for showing up. Might already be answered, but Doc, yes. So we have some people in the house, at least 3 here now so far, that can answer a lot of your advanced questions, especially when it comes to a lot of these engine questions. Yep. Docker CE 2103 is already out. So yeah, B, we already answered your question. If you didn't hear the answer, the answer is yes. It is meant for new people, that course. Thank you for buying it. Thank you for being a student. Yeah, we've had multiple episodes. I mean, I feel like we've had dedicated entire shows just on the shim replacement. I think I had one when it was announced. I had Justin Cormack from Docker on, and we just spent a whole hour talking about the nitty gritty. But we still need to get the word out. And even the Kubernetes blog has had, I don't know, at least 3 or 4 attempts at trying to explain, hey, this is no big deal. We're just letting you know that you need to change your stuff. Because a lot of us, we're just using Kubernetes. We don't really pay attention to the deep internals. And sometimes, especially if you're on a distribution that chooses your own runtime for you, it's just a non-event, right? We're just upgrading Rancher or whatever, and the runtime might be maintained for us. But others might have to manage their own runtimes and care about versions and care about shims or the proper installation and configuration. Just depends on who you are. I try to avoid that work. I try to just use the clouds and all the distributions that manage that for me. So, and Nuno, by the way, thank you so much. We didn't get a group shot of everyone. We needed to have like all of the people at Tampa a couple weeks ago actually just give us all a picture of all the speakers, because it was a great group of people there. But Nuno came all the way from Switzerland and brought us chocolate. And ours is gone. My chocolate did not make it back from Florida. My mother and my wife and I all enjoyed it very much on our little mini 2-day vacation after the conference in Florida. Yes, I flew my mom down for a couple of days in Tampa Bay, Florida. That was the thing. Dan, this is a great question. Is Docker Engine FIPS compliant? NearGuard may know that question or may know the answer. I would say I don't think so. Top of my head, I don't believe Docker Engine itself is FIPS compliant. That might be something that Mirantis does. I don't know for a fact. I would have to just Google it, essentially. Most of these companies, if they're going to go through FIPS compliance, FIPS certification, it's going to be like a whole page on their website about it. There you go. My guess was correct. Docker is not, and MCR is. And so if you know the history of this stuff, MCR is like the new hotness for what Eric is talking about, the Docker EE engine, which is no longer a thing. It's just, it's run by a different company, called a different name, but the same idea is we have the standard open source version we all use, and then there is this more, there's more rigor put into an enterprise version that you can use alternatively. And in the past, it was not free, back when Docker owned it. I don't know. I'm pretty sure you can run MCR for free, but I'm not a Mirantis spokesperson. So I used to go to a security conference. I don't know if Eric ever went to that. Docker used to have a security conference, or really it was a government conference in Washington, D.C., and I would go to that every year, and that would be a common question around FIPS compliance. There was a couple of other, government compliance and certifications that were necessary that people kept asking about. And for a while there, it was actually kind of fun because people would show up at the conference and they were just learning and loving Docker. And they were authorized to use Docker. It was somehow on the the sheet of authorized software for SIPRNet or NIPRNet or whatever network they were running on, and but they weren't allowed to use Kubernetes yet. So we would just kind of tell them, hey, you can still do orchestration. It's actually built in the Docker engine. It's called Swarm, and it'll get you started. Like you can build up your clusters, and then eventually, when Kubernetes is because essentially what they were all saying was, we need some sort of orchestration, but we don't have approval for Kubernetes. What can we do? And instead of running a bunch of individual Docker servers, we were always saying, hey, you can do Swarm. It's actually included. It's already in the code. Just type Docker Swarm init. And it wasn't, because Swarm wasn't listed as a product inside of their build a material allowance. But since it was built into Docker, we were kind of sneaking around the conference saying, hey, you can still do it. You can still do Docker. You can still do Docker. So that was kind of fun. But they don't have that conference anymore. MCR does have licensing. So this is good info. There's an evaluation with a time limit, but technically you do need to pay, just like with Docker EE. That's good to know. I read some of the documentation, but I don't pay attention to the pricing, unfortunately. So is Nerd Control still maintained? As far as I know, if yes, I think you don't really need Docker anymore if you're not using Docker Desktop. Yes, that's true. If you're not using Docker Desktop and you're using Containerd doesn't really have a human-friendly command line tool. This is actually a topic that's been going on today, all in that server. So if you are interested in that topic about Docker Desktop alternatives, command line tooling for Containerd and the different options, Jordan actually explained a lot of that really well today, talking about the lower level versus higher level tools. And if you didn't know, I actually have a spreadsheet over here that I will send another link to. DD Alt, it's this link right here. But this is a spreadsheet that I try, with your help, I need your help, to keep track of Docker Desktop alternatives and their functionality in comparison to Docker Desktop. So if you're someone who either can't or won't run Docker Desktop, which is still my favorite way locally to run containers, then there are plenty of other options, including Rancher Desktop. We've got Lima plus Nerd Control, and now we've got Podman Desktop, which, weirdly enough, can run Docker Desktop extensions inside of Podman Desktop. Kind of like, VS Code variants also can run VS Code extensions. It's kind of the same thing. So there are a lot of things here. If you scroll through, you'll see all the features that I listed. And I'm always looking for more input. I actually have a tab for you to help out what you can do, how you can get a hold of us. You can add comments in here. Please don't close the comments, but don't click the box. Just leave the comments there, because it helps people understand the caveats or the nuances between all these different tools and things you can do. And the whole purpose of this spreadsheet isn't to try to get rid of Docker Desktop, because, again, I still think it's the best. But sometimes you're just not allowed to use it. Maybe you're not allowed to pay for it in your company. Maybe your company doesn't approve it because it is required to. If you're a certain size company, you have to buy a license. Or maybe it doesn't work for you. Like maybe you're not happy with the performance on Mac, or maybe you've hit a certain bug in it that you just need to work around temporarily. So, and plus, we're all curious, right? We all want to know about all the different options and ways. So there's a lot here. And the intention is to help people make better decisions and not have to try everything only to find out it doesn't do the thing they need. Like, does it work with Docker Compose, my favorite developer tool? Does it run on Windows ARM 64, Windows on ARM, the new hotness on Windows 11? Does it run there? Does it run on Mac M1s? Like, there's a lot of different questions, and so I'm trying to keep track of those for you. So please check that out if you're interested. That's been around a couple of years, and I know that we probably need to do some of the updating because everybody has been adding more functionality and features, and there's just a lot of movement in this space. So we got a vote evidently in here for Nerd Control, so that's good. Ooh, that's a good point. Yeah, so just installing the Docker engine through apt or whatever the package manager is in your WSL distribution, that is a viable option. If you don't need a GUI, if you don't need the Windows file system support, if you just want to do everything inside WSL 2, and then you could technically still use VS Code or some of the other editors that support remoting in. So, yeah, that's actually a good option. I'm going to add that. I'm going to write that down. Thank you. Trying to think what we're going to call that. We're going to call that WSL2 Docker engine. Because that kind of opens up a whole lot of things, right? Because if you just say, well, include every runtime that we can run in Linux that you can then install in WSL2, that ends up with a larger list here of more tooling. A lot of these, especially maybe the top 7, 8, or 9, were really about something that you could use across OS in a team. Not all of these solutions obviously work on Mac, Windows, and Linux desktop, but as you get down here near the bottom, this isn't really intentional. I maybe do sort it by the number of checkboxes. I'm trying to remember if I did that. But as you get down closer to the bottom, like Vagrant, you start to run into some of these, I will just call esoteric solutions that are not feature rich and not necessarily easy to use as something like the desktops. We'll just call it the Docker desktop, the Rancher desktop, the Podman desktop. Yeah. But that's you're right. That's still a viable option for people on Windows because Windows is basically now the best place to do Linux. Because you get the world of Windows plus the world of Linux all in one without the performance hit. The namespace target runtime. We'll have to talk about that next week, Nuno. Not sure what you mean there. I'm just catching up on the chat here. Dan's talking about the FIPS and Stig. Is that how we're going to say that? Stig Kubernetes? I don't know about Stig. So you can bind mount paths from Mount C with plain Docker CE. Okay. This is why. This is what happens when you're not a daily Windows user. I have Windows VMs, but I only really use them to help students, and I need help in that area. So thank you. That's a great question, Chris, on do all of these use the Docker Hub images? Yes, they do. In fact, that's the wonderful thing about this industry now is we have OCI. And OCI helps us standardize the container image format, the container runtime protocols and APIs, as well as the registry APIs. And so we have those three parts. We might call that the holy trinity of containers, container standards, because OCI helps us keep things sane so that you can use a third-party registry with a different container runtime and everything still uses the same images. There are little edge cases on new features and things that maybe are a little rough, but in general, everything just works, like in general. Once you start to get into things that are maybe ahead of the spec, like some of the stuff we're talking about recently with SBOMs or provenance and attestations, like some of these newer ideas about things we can store in registries, Helm charts, OCI, artifacts. But this is all like new stuff in the last couple of years. So that stuff is a little bit inconsistent depending on what tools you're using. But in general, just running an Nginx app works regardless of the registry, regardless of the container runtime, regardless of the way you built your image. Yeah. We've got Builda, right? We've got all these other tools in the industry that help us with those three parts. And if you start listing all the container runtimes, all the container registries, and then all the container image build tools, you can basically end up with a graph of, the core features are agreed upon by everyone. Docker still has some extra things it does on top of that. And there is such a thing as OCI image spec and the Docker image spec. Those are slightly different. And, but I just don't find that most people have a problem. Like the nuances and the details only affect, a few percents of people. And those are usually the people on the leading edge of all this stuff. The rest of us, it just kind of works. Most people use a cloud registry and then just the runtime that comes with their Kubernetes distribution, and that all works. And then they use Docker build in some places. They might use Builda or some other build tool somewhere else. They might, like Eric likes to point out, they might use a language or ecosystem specific build tool, like in Java or something like that, where they have a very specific way that they want to build their images, but they all just work, right, together because of OCI. So that's a great question. Is somebody quoting the year of Linux on the desktop? Yeah, I mean, I'd love to get a Surface, but the reality is it would, it's a slick looking piece of hardware, and I really have wanted a Surface for years, but it would probably just sit here. I actually got rid of my iPad because I didn't use it that often. I had an great iPad Pro. I could even use development on it with VS Code. It was awesome, but I have a MacBook right now. I'm talking to you now on a MacBook Pro. It's silent, runs all day. It's powerful. It lets me do all this fancy stuff with streaming, and I have servers in the closet and servers in the cloud, and I'm kind of getting old, I guess. I have a Raspberry Pi. Does that count? I don't know. So I just have a lot of tools, but I don't use a lot of the stuff outside of my Mac and my phone. So someday I might be back on Windows, but we'll see. If it counts, if it matters, my main server in my closet is Windows Server 2022 with the GUI running Hyper-V, and it has all my Linux and Windows VMs in it. I do that because I'm still old school Windows guy. So I have like 4 or 5 SSDs in there. And that runs a lot of things. I got, 32, 48 gig of RAM in there. And it's like a 10-year-old server running a Xeon processor and still runs like a champ. Still runs Windows 10, Windows 11. I used to have some core servers, but I don't think I run those anymore. Any Docker alternatives that can run on Azure or AWS hosts? Been struggling with that for a couple of projects. Docker alternatives. So what we're talking about, Chris, I think, people are probably helping in chat. I guess we're talking about runtimes. And so if you're running individual servers, right, and you're not running an orchestrator, because you say Docker alternative, so I'm thinking Docker is an engine that runs on a single server at a time, unless you're enabling Swarm. So you could use Containerd with Nerd Control. You could use Podman. Those are variants. My first question would be why? Why do you want to make it harder? Docker is free and open source. Docker Engine, at least. Docker CLI. Docker Compose. Those are all built in. So I would be curious about motivations or what doesn't work for you. But if you're interested in just learning, or if you just have some aversion to Docker applications for some reason, excuse me, sorry, I would probably try Podman first. Podman is kind of a purpose-built way to use systemd to run containers without needing Docker Engine installed. And it has a similar command line and tooling for building and managing images, running containers. So I would probably do that before I would do Nerd Control and Containerd, but that's just me. By the way, feel free, great question, by the way. Feel free to keep asking that question if you have more questions about it. People in chat certainly can help you. We have a lot of experts here today, and I'm excited about that. How to access VS Code from WSL2. So you got to learn about VS Code Remote. It is the bomb. And so VS Code Remote is a whole set of tools that allow you to develop remotely, whether that's remotely into WSL, remotely into a container running somewhere else, remotely through SSH. There's really lots of cool ways, and it looks and feels native. And you can even, you can use GitHub code spaces or other code space variants to run your server with your code, but your VS Code editor is local on your machine, either in a GUI or in a browser. And so check that out. There's the Remote Development Extension Pack, and it comes with the WSL features built in. And so the cool thing about that is you can just open up a WSL terminal and type code and then the directory you want to open, and it'll open up code on your Windows GUI. It's magical. It works the same way on Linux desktop and Mac, and it just works. So if you're interested in that, if you're someone who's interested in WSL2, come back next week too. Nuno, this smart guy right here, he's going to be on the show, and we're focusing entirely on WSL2. WSL, Windows all day long. He is the Windows Corsair. So we're going to do that, and all these questions will probably be repeated there, and we'll go more in depth, and Nuno has better answers because he's way smarter on Windows. He's way smarter than me in general, but especially on Windows. Alexandria's back. Started using SHA-256 hash notation of the container images instead of plain tags. It's kind of inconvenient, but in production, I think this is a must. This is a great conversation. We should have it right now. So I'm gonna pause. I'm looking at all the chat. Let me make sure that there's nothing crazy there. But I think this is a great topic to have because we're having the same conversations all over the internet. I also read a piece recently on how we keep relearning the same things in tech over and over again every 5 years. But this is not that. But this is basically we are having the same conversations around the container ecosystem because, yes, I agree with you. We probably should all be pinning to SHAs when we deploy to production. Now, does that mean that you write in your YAML the friendly tag name and then it's turned into a SHA hash and basically pinned on its way to production by robots? That's one way to do it. You can do that today. Or you, the human, can pin to a SHA hash. I recently just had to relearn that you can actually specify the tag and the SHA hash that you want for that tag in case your tags are reused. You can specify all that in the image name. I kept thinking it was one or another, and it's actually you can do both. So yes, I think that's the safe way to do it. Some tools are allowing us to set this up automatically, so they'll solve this problem for us. One of the challenges, which is just a discussion we had yesterday or maybe the day before in the DevOps chat, was around can I retroactively look up a SHA hash and find which tags point to it? Because sometimes if you just pin to the SHA hash and not the version plus the SHA hash, you, the human, won't know what tags you're running. So basically, there's a couple of things I learned. One is no, that doesn't exist today. There's no reverse search of SHA hashes. There are ways to brute force it using there's a reg client, a tool that you can use that you can basically loop over all the images in a repo and eventually find the ones that match the tag, and it's kind of a brute force method. But there is no easy search yet. And it's actually started a discussion in the Docker Captain's channel with the Docker employees quickly around, is this a thing we need? Do we need to index all of this and make it available? And I think probably eventually yes. We're going to need something that helps us turn long numbers into friendly names. This is also why DNS exists, right? We all didn't remember IPv4s, and we definitely can't remember v6s. We can't remember MAC addresses, so humans need friendly names. The computers in the background work it all out. And that's much how tags work today. Tags in the back end often are just turned into SHA hashes anyway. But a lot of us want to pin to a specific SHA hash just in case we need to redeploy in the future, or we want to deploy it somewhere else, and we want to be guaranteed that it's exactly the same manifest or the exact same layers. And I think that the tooling is going to help us work all this out. In fact, I think ChainGuard recently was saying that they kind of want to make this a standard in the security industry, that we always pin to a SHA hash. I think it's a good practice, but you're right. We kind of need better tooling, and we're probably going to need some sort of lookup. We don't really have a lot of that yet, so stay tuned. I would say for now, the best you can probably hope for is if you're doing this in YAML, or if you're doing this in scripts or something where you're sort of doing this yourself, is to pin to the SHA hash, but put the version in front of it. Someone else probably has the format that they can type into chat. Let me see if I can write this up. Let's see. I'm looking to see if I can find an article that, yeah. So see, some of these articles, I'm just Googling real quick. Some of these articles are like my old knowledge, where they're saying, oh, pin to a specific version, but then you lose the tag name. But you can do both. And of course, no one is showing that. Even Circle CI is not showing that you can do this. I think it was Eric that told me, or somebody told me this recently this week, and I was thinking, oh man, I forgot. Here we go. All right, so here's a good format. Let me see if I can find this. Right here. All right, I didn't want to have to type it out. So, let me zoom in here. So this is what's possible. So you can actually combine both. So if you're using Compose or Kubernetes or any that I'm aware of, if you don't have a tool that resolves the SHA hash for you and pins to it for you, you could do it this way, so that the human part of you can see the left side and know what repo and tag you intended to use, but on the right of the @ sign, specifically which SHA hash you want to pin to in case that tag is reused. So you can do this everywhere. Excuse me, sorry, coughing today. Anyway, thanks to those who reminded me that this is a thing. I think that's very helpful. Yes, the reg control tool is, I think when you're starting to do stuff like this, advanced stuff with the registry, reg control is definitely the tool to use there. regctl. Yeah, Chris, yeah. So if you can't, I would try Portainer. I would try Podman, Eric. Or sorry, not Eric, but Chris. Yeah. It's an interesting thing. There used to be a little bit of a tiff. Well, I mean, maybe it's still around, but I don't hear much about it anymore, between Red Hat and Docker. They didn't get along 6 years ago. So a lot of people that were in the Red Hat camp would do everything they could to avoid Docker, specifically for politic reasons. Layers 9 of the OSI. And layer, 8 and 9 or whatever, religion and politics. So, and in that case, I would just try Podman. As far as I know, it's probably the smoothest experience. And I believe that I think Bjorn was talking about this yesterday in chat or something, that you can in Podman, you can run a command that actually will allow you to run the Docker command line, and it just sort of uses Podman, but it doesn't work with every option and every feature. It just uses with the major features. Yeah, and that's a good point. Maybe their issue is with Docker being root, and of course you can run Docker rootless. You can run, Podman can be rootless. Like it, sometimes it's is it licensing? Is it hopefully it's not Apache? There are issues with Apache because it's hopefully it's not a licensing issue because there's lots of it's not like Docker's using a special license. So yeah. Yeah, thanks for being here, Bjorn. Sorry if you've already left and I missed you, but thanks for being here. By the way, a Moby maintainer, very knowledgeable. I'm glad to have them in the community, in this community, my community, whatever this is, in the DevOps fan community. That's right there. By the way, you can all join that. Hey, Kevin's thrown down some knowledge. Yep, repo/image :tag at SHA-256 : the SHA. Like it's a cryptic little set of colons and slashes and @ signs, but it does work. And as far as I know, it works everywhere. So that to me would really help. It helps the machines guarantee the uniqueness. Not the guarantee uniqueness, guarantee that it's running exactly the same bits I wanted, but also helping me remember, hey, what version was that? This is also a good argument for why if you're building custom software, that you try to figure out a way to identify everything in environment variables and labels in your Docker files. So typically when I work with production companies that are dealing with this sort of issue, one of the things we want to do is light up the metadata. And by metadata, I mean labels in the container build as well as envs inside, labels and envs inside the Docker file, right? So basically, do you care, if you have Simver for your apps, you put those in there. If you have dependency versions that you want to pin and hard code, put them in there. Even if you're not using the environment variables, if you're just putting them in there, it makes it easy to discover commit IDs, PR numbers, like all the things that you might need. For me, I actually tag things with mini tags. So I'll tag the PR number. I'll actually tag an image with the GitHub action runner ID, basically what run it was, so I can go back and reference the logs. So if you put all that stuff in the labels and envs now inside the image, you can then do things like just use Docker inspect later to discover what's really running in that container. Because if you haven't noticed, if you pin something or you pull an image by SHA-hash, you don't see the labels inside the metadata. If you do a Docker inspect on an image that you didn't pull by tag, it won't for some reason show the tags. It's just not a feature of Docker. It doesn't go and find all the tags that are possible for that SHA-hash and then include them. It's just empty. You basically end up with an empty array in your metadata JSON. And it's a shame, but what that means is that you need to do better as a team inside of your images to see all the versions of things in metadata and labels. And for me, I always just use environment variables as much as I can, because even then my apps can see it, and my sysadmins on the servers can easily see it, and my build process can see it. Everything can see it. It's in the logs everywhere if I use envs. Yeah. So I'm glad that helped, Alexandria. That's a good talk. That's actually something that I had to relearn. I know I feel like I learned it years ago with BuildKit and when I was learning about SHA-hashes originally, and then I totally forgot. And then someone had to remind me this week that, hey, did you know you can also use both tag and SHA-hash? Esser's asking, our Docker container logs are unlimited in filling up the server. I can set limits to the compose file, but I'm looking at using another logging driver like AWS logs. Does it make sense to have both? Yes or no. That's a good discussion. So Docker technically can now have multiple drivers. That's actually a feature that landed in the last 3 years, I think. Previously, if you were to choose AWS logs and Docker as a way to send the logs to AWS, there would be nothing local on the machine. So it would be empty. And I believe that the Docker logs command would just be empty, because there's those logs that would stay local in JSON don't exist anymore. They're now sent away. So the safe thing, if you don't want to deal with disk space and cleanup, the safe way is to send those logs to AWS only. If you need to do troubleshooting on the server, those logs might be more useful on the server itself. But if you're not in the habit of SSHing into a server, which I don't generally recommend as you grow because it doesn't scale well, especially if you're creating machines on a regular basis, just have those logs sent elsewhere. Have some sort of management GUI like Portainer or something to manage the instances and the container runtimes in them. And just be okay with the fact that you're going to have to search the logs in AWS. If you want to keep them on server and you choose both logging drivers, that's fine too, but now you got to do the cleanup. The two things I would do is, I would set that setting inside of the logs in the Docker commands to make sure that it basically has a limited retention. And then I would also make sure you have a routine for pruning images and containers, because logs are only deleted by default in Docker. Logs are only deleted when the container is deleted. And if you don't go and prune servers every 30 days, or whatever, every week, then those images are hanging around. I'm sorry, not the images. The containers are hanging around after they're stopped and replaced, and those logs hang around. So you're filling up the disk space anyway. I have an example of this over on, let's see, dog versus cat. In this repo, this one specifically shows how to do it for Swarm, but it works the same way in just a regular Docker container. Prune. So this is a very, very simple little command line. I don't know if you can see this. Let me zoom in. So what this does is this is just a shell while true loop that every 24 hours delete all images. And this does images. What it probably should be doing is deleting containers as well. So delete containers and images. So you can just add another command there, right? Delete containers that are stopped. And you can probably figure out containers that have been stopped for over 24 hours or something like that. But in here, I'm basically saying Docker prune and filter to anything older than the last 24 hours. One of the things this does, I think B. Mitch actually let me know of this little trick. If you're not careful with this, you could actually be deleting an image that you're actively pulling. And so if you hit the exact second, you could actually delete an image right before Docker does a Docker start or a Docker create. And you could end up with errors because it pulled an image and then you deleted it before it could run it. I think in here, it's not going to delete images if there's active containers using those images. So, but specifically for logging, you'd want to clean up the containers. And Docker doesn't do that automatically. So you would maybe just have some of these running in the background. That might help you. Great. Mr. Zugpug, thanks for taking the course. I really appreciate it. I don't get a lot of sales from YouTube. A lot of people on YouTube just want to stay on YouTube and get stuff for free. So I really appreciate it when people will go out and be willing to, spend the $10, $15, $20 or whatever to buy my 22-hour Docker mastery course with over 200 videos now. And more are coming. I've already got another section that I'm working on to add there. We just added a new section a couple of months ago. So, yeah, Kevin, that's a great point. I always assumed that was true. Didn't know that for a fact, but I always assumed that the tag could just be anything. It was more of a human documentation thing, and that it literally didn't have to match. So I'm glad that someone is pointing that that tag can be anything because it's the SHA hash that matters. So essentially, you still have to trust the person who's putting this in. But yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that it would even. I don't know how it would work any other way, right? The machine would then look at the image tag. I mean, the whole point in pinning the SHA hash there anyway is in case the tag is reused, it basically should ignore the tag and use the SHA because you're pinning the SHA. So it kind of makes sense when you kind of think about it, but it's good to have a confirmation. Thanks, everyone. If you're leaving, I appreciate you. See you next week. Yeah, because it's not a security risk. Yeah, as long as you don't expect that tag. That's the whole reason you're pinning the SHA, is you're not expecting the tag to be unique forever. If you're using something like Harbor and you go in and you enable the feature that only allows a tag to be used once, then you're a little safer because you're enforcing it as at the registry, not necessarily on the cluster. So your security people still may not like it, but you can do that if you're using something like Harbor. I don't believe you can do that in Docker Hub. So I think that's a very specific Harbor feature. But Harbor can help you guarantee that your tags are unique. But yeah, in general, you can't rely on tags to guarantee that something doesn't change. That's the problem with tags in most places, is that you can reuse them, meaning that you can push a new image that isn't what people intended. And if you have permissions to do that, you can do it. And then the next time that the container is sent to the cluster will run whatever you sent it. Like, it'll run whatever is in that tag now, not what it was before. So that's why it's recommended to pin on the SHA hash, because you can, once you are certain that SHA hash is the exact software you want to run, then you pin it and you're guaranteed that that's the only thing that will run. So I consider it a security improvement. To me, the tag is always just for human, close to approximate friendly names, right? You can certainly not, in almost all cases, guarantee that if two servers on the internet run the same tag a day apart, you can't guarantee that they're going to be the same software. So, you're actually using Docker Swarm, so that works. So, so go look at that example. Esther, I'll put this link in chat. You can go check that out. And yes, you could do that on Swarm. Yeah, okay. He had some issues with pulling the image, yep. Yeah. Yeah. Are you leaving, or are you saying you're leaving and you just can't quit? Where can you buy my 22-hour course? Yes, the link is below. It's on Udemy, but there's coupons below that'll get you the near Black Friday sale price. I think the current sale price of the coupon down there, if you just go to bretfisher.com/courses, or the link below in Udemy, those links get you. I think you get the course for like $13. The every once in a while, like once a quarter, or when Udemy puts them on sale, I don't know, once a quarter on Black Friday, or in August before, they'll put them on sale for like $9.99 sometimes. But that's not as often anymore than they used to be. So you can go to bretfisher.com/courses, and I now have 5 here, including the new one. That's going to be the live course next month. And then you can see my Udemy courses here. And yeah, so the links here include the coupon, or you can come up here and you can grab the coupon. And I refresh that coupon every month with essentially I put it at the cheapest price that Udemy will let me make it, that is good for the coupon for 30 days. I can technically get it a few dollars cheaper, but the coupon then only lasts a couple of days. And so it's too much work to and I can only make, Udemy only lets you make 3 coupons a month. So I already use them all anyway, so I can't really make it any cheaper than that. But thanks for asking, and good luck, the blockchain-y. Alexandru, is there any roadmap for Docker Swarm? Not really. I mean, just like every open source project, you can look at the PRs that are happening, and Swarm has been getting steady PRs for years. And there's actually a very small and vocal community for Swarm, which is why I just announced earlier that I just launched Awesome Swarm, because in the new Docker version that came out this month, there was new Swarm features. And there is I sell Swarm courses to people every day. Like, someone on Udemy is buying my Swarm courses every day. So I wouldn't say that Swarm is dead. I would just say that It is not the most popular container orchestrator by far, but like every other tool, we need multiple options. We need more than one opinion on how to do a thing. And so we have Nomad and we have Swarm. Swarm is probably the least active in terms of new feature releases of the three major orchestrators. I would call those Kubernetes, Nomad, and Swarm. But the Swarm community, I would say, is still alive. And you can tell that because Mirantis, a large for-profit company, puts a lot of effort into it. In fact, I started to catalog some of their latest, just in the last year, they've had 3 different blog articles on stuff. So what you might want to do, and I will put this in chat, is look at these 3 Mirantis articles, because they do talk about what's next for Swarm and stuff like that. I wouldn't call it a roadmap, but it's something. It tells you what they're working on. They talk about the CSI support that just came out and what else they're looking at. So I would check that out if you're interested in retrying Swarm as a simpler method when you don't need Kubernetes. What's the best option for monitoring? That's a great question. I would say that it depends on the money, the people, like how much time do you have, how many people, resources do you have, and how much money do you have. If you don't have people resources, in other words, if you don't have a lot of time for implementing your own custom Prometheus solution, essentially open source, right? You're going to pay one way or the other. You're either going to pay with time or money. And that's really, to me, what matters. If you don't know what you need, try what comes with your distribution. If you're on a Kubernetes distribution, often it'll come with a built-in tool or a built-in recipe to deploy Prometheus. If you're in a cloud, the cloud itself can provide monitoring and centralized logging. And so I would use those first if you don't know what you need. Once you mature, you'll start to understand your requirements for monitoring and logging better, and you'll know what you need that you don't have. And then you can change it. And that's the beauty of these systems, is that you can change them. You don't have to stick with one logging or monitoring provider forever. So DigitalOcean is one of my favorite easy Kubernetes clouds, as well as Civo Navigate, or Civo. I always say Civo Navigate because of the conference. Civo, that's another easy Kubernetes distribution in the cloud. And they have some limited monitoring that goes on there. If you want to roll your own with Prometheus, you might look at some of the examples of Prometheus out there for bundling all the Prometheus tools, but it's dozens of containers. Like, it takes time. It's not just something you do in an hour. So you might not have the time for that, which then means you should probably spend some money. And there are lots and lots of Kubernetes monitoring tools out there now that are SaaSes. So some of those have been on this show. You could probably just search monitoring in this YouTube channel, and you will find multiple guests on this show talking about their monitoring solutions for Kubernetes. Some of those are cheap, some of those are not. New Relic is not cheap. Datadog, great tool, not cheap. The really fancy, big, advanced ones typically are more expensive. And then there are smaller players like you might look at Grafana Cloud. That's one. Grafana Cloud is one that maybe would provide easy and more. It basically runs on open source. So let's see if I can find a Grafana Cloud. There we go. So this is fully managed observability, meaning it in the background it's using Loki, I believe. It tells you right here: Prometheus, Grafana tools, and others. So you might try that out. It's a little cheaper than the big dogs. Hopefully that helps. That's a great question. New Relic and ones like Datadog work on every cloud and every hybrid, every data center. They have a million features. They're very advanced, and they work great. They have been around for a long time. But if you don't have the budget for that, then I would try some of these smaller players that maybe rely more on open source. And then if you can't afford those, but you have the time, then you would look up some of the charts. You would look up, a Prometheus chart for Kubernetes, like a Helm chart, and try those things out. But now you got to worry about storage. You got to worry about backups and configuration and alerting and making sure that it's connected to all the alerting systems like your Slack and your text or whatever you need to be alerted with. So you got to work all that out yourself, and you may not have the time. So it really depends on which knob can you turn, the time knob or the human personnel or the money. You turn it on dynamically. That's actually an interesting idea. If you have a toggle where you can just quickly deploy New Relic, turn on your subscription, that's a great idea. It's a way to save money. And then maybe you could use the cloud at least at a basic level. I mean, I know AWS now provides Prometheus as a service offering. I'd like to think that it's reasonably priced, but I don't really do price comparisons, so I don't really know if it's cheaper than Grafana Cloud or cheaper than Datadog or whatever. So, but I really don't have. That's the recommendations, right? I really don't. It's hard to give a blanket recommendation for anyone because I've got to figure out what your budget is, how many people you have, what your expertise is. Do you know a tool or another tool? What do you know? What do you have time for? And so that's really it. I mean, I think all these tools can answer the basic questions like what is running, what's not running, do I have resource problems, do I have connectivity problems, do I have throughput problems, do I have spikes in connectivity or usage, like all the sort of basic monitoring stuff, they all do. And then from there, it's really about what you need, what kind of dashboards and critical data do you need to understand your workloads and what things are happening. Yeah. Cool. All right, people. This has been an hour and a half now. I'm going to wrap it up. If you have any last minute questions, please ask them now. As a reminder, next week, Nuno's going to be on the show. I'm going to have to search for Swarmanettes because I did not know. I don't know about Swarmanettes, so I'm going to have to look that up. But Nuno's going to be on the show next week. We're going to talk about Windows, WSL2. If you didn't hear the word at the beginning or during some of my announcements, I have a brand new course. You can get it on my website over there or links below. It's my new Maven course, and we will be talking about that for the next month because it's a new type of live workshop where you're going to be working directly with me and with a very small group of people, 10 to 15 people. Excuse me. And we're going to be doing stuff together around automation and GitOps. And I'm very excited about that. If you didn't know, you can support this show and the podcast, the open source, the Discord server above. You can support all that by getting a membership either here on YouTube. You can just member right now. You can click the little membership button, buy me a coffee every month, and support this community. If you find value in it, if you enjoy the content I'm creating, like we just released this week, the Awesome Swarm. I released that early this morning, technically late last night. And then coming soon are a list of security best practices around containers. And I've been doing this for a while now, by the way, the security stuff. There's I have to call it Security First. It's not really a blog post, it's a discussion over here, in case you've never read this, that really talks about a lot of the things you should be doing for security in containers. But it's not as comprehensive as I would like, and it's not, it doesn't flow as well as I'd like. It's also not as complete as I want it to be. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. There's some video links, but essentially this is going to grow up, and it's going to be living over here, which I will also put in chat. And this is going to be the area where I start to put a lot of my security recommendations for various things, all related to containers, whether you're building containers, testing containers, deploying containers, monitoring containers, all that stuff. But it's going to be focused on security. And that's all the stuff I'm doing, right? So if you want to support that, get a membership either here on YouTube or on my website. If you didn't know, we have a swag store, and coming soon to a conference near you. I just finished coming back from Civo Navigate. I'm not sure yet whether I'm going to KubeCon in Amsterdam. So those of you that are going to KubeCon, hopefully I will be there to see you. And if not, I will see you in Chicago at KubeCon or at DockerCon. And we don't know yet if DockerCon is going to be in the real world. There's also a couple of other conferences this year I'm thinking of speaking at. One of them is in St. Louis called Strange Loop. I've been there before. It's a pretty cool conference. And it's a community conference. It's a smaller one. And then there's a couple other ones that I'm kind of looking at. One of them is in possibly Vancouver, GitOpsCon. I'm not sure if I'll speak there, maybe just go. We're trying to figure it all out. But hopefully, if you see me at a conference, if we're at the same conference, we need to get a selfie because that's my role. Meet people in the community, high five, get a selfie. All right. Yeah, Dan, are you in St. Louis? That's great. Yeah, I was at Strange Loop in 2016. I'm actually born and bred in Missouri, so I like going back there for that conference. It's just a question of timing, and yeah. Hey, thanks for the super chat, Mr. Zugpug. I appreciate you. You get the reggae horn. I appreciate that. Nomad is great. So I'm going to a quick fire on these questions. Nomad is great. If you don't like Swarm, I think Swarm is easier than Nomad, but Nomad is possibly easier than Kubernetes, although sometimes I think that's debatable. I don't know of a Nomad hoster. Maybe someone else does, but Kubernetes can be cloud hosted without you having to run any of the servers. So that's largely part of the complexity of Kubernetes that the cloud is taken away. So it's a great debate. We will have that debate in a future show. Andres, I don't know about Talos OS. I've never used it, so I don't really have an opinion. Geerling Guyland, St. Louis. Oh, Jeff Geerling. Oh, is he in St. Louis? Oh man, Jeff's awesome. I have not met him in the real world, but he makes great videos. So, all right, everyone. Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Brendan. Everyone else on the show: Dan, Alexandru, Andres, Raja Sleelan. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Flavio. Everyone here, I appreciate you. Thanks so much for being here. We will be here live next week, and there's more guests coming soon. Remember, we're rotating. Every other week is Q&A. Every other week is a guest, and we're going to have more and more guests this year. All these things turn into podcasts when I have guests, and we'll see you live next week here on YouTube. Until then, I'm going to be in the Discord server, so come hang out with us for free. 12,000 Discord people all just chatting about containers. All right, see you next time. Ciao.